You're listening to Authentically You, a podcast about the threads that connect us to ourselves, to others, and to the world around us. I'm Alfina Luck, actor, producer, and mentor. After more than 20 years both on camera and behind the scenes, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people learn to fall in love with being seen and heard, on camera, in life, and in all our relations. To be witnessed on your journey is to weave your evolution into the greater human story. Through stories, reflections, and raw conversations, we'll explore confidence, creativity, and the inner healing work that allows us to show up as our true selves. This is our space to embrace presence, connection, and the power of being authentically you. Hi, and welcome back to Authentically You. This past week has been particularly difficult, and I am sitting here now on the other side of quite a tumultuous experience. And on the other side, I'm also really excited to dive into this with you today because I have mentioned my marriage with my husband a few times throughout. And if you've been listening, I did mention once that when my husband and I met, we actually connected and fell in love and we trauma bonded. And we almost didn't make it many, many times in our marriage. But we're here now, 16 years later. We celebrated our 16-year wedding anniversary last month. And when you've been together for that amount of time, you reflect, right? You review and look at how did we get here? Where are we at now? And if anyone knows that's married, that in a marriage that lasts longer than, 5 years, 10 years, there's work. It takes work to make this successful, to make this work. And that's why they call it work. And so what I want to share with you today did not happen because of chance or anything other than the fact that when you are married to someone and you make a commitment, a real commitment to being on the path for the betterment of your life together, your love, your family, your individual paths, your callings, your passions, your soul's journey, there are times that arises that will really put you to the test, that will really challenge if your love is strong enough, if your individual self is strong enough, if you can overcome these trials and tribulations. And it's in these trials and tribulations and during these challenges that you can rise again together on the other side to be able to look back and say, wow, we got here. We made it this far. And it's nice to be able to celebrate those moments. And so we've always talked about doing a podcast together down the road, but this experience is so perfectly aligned with what we are talking about on this podcast that I asked him if I could share experience, and he was completely okay. He knows what we're doing here. He knows what the platform is for. He knows what the purpose of these conversations are for. And so to give you some context, we've been together 16 years. And so when you are with someone for this amount of time, you start to see patterns. You get to know all sides of the other person, right? They're your biggest reflection because you can't really hide everything from them. Hopefully. I mean, maybe some people can. We can't. We wear our hearts on our sleeves. And that means the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so what that means is in the best of times, in the worst of times, and in the worst of times, what I'm talking about today is the ego, living with the ego. And so recognizing the destructive patterns of an ego. Now, this isn't the first time that I've had to call out his ego, and it's probably not going to be the last time. But every time it happens, we get a bit closer. We chip away at the layers of the onion so we get closer and closer to the truth, his journey's truth, what his soul truly desires to be here. We both come from a lot of trauma, different origin, but for context, single moms, living in poverty, traumatic childhoods, dysfunctional families, different type of dysfunction, but nonetheless, we share a similar upbringing. We share similar patterns in our identity and the attachment to identity and what that all looks like. So my husband, Andrew, has lived a life with a lot of addiction, and that is stemmed from trauma. And so now, having done a lot of work already on it, he still struggles with quitting smoking. He enjoys a beer once in a while, sometimes too much. And it's self-destructive, right? It is hurting him. He's tried to quit smoking. I can't even count how many times he's tried to quit smoking. But what it does is it creates this really cyclical pattern that puts him in a place of both self-destructive, but also disconnects him from his family, which is myself and our daughter. The patterns that I see that has occurred with his journey to want to quit smoking is he will promise to quit, or actually, it'll get to a point where his body is screaming in pain, like his chest is hurting. We've had heart attack scares and, even other things like pain in his foot, all these signals in his physical body, and he's had to get tested. This has happened a handful of times, I can't even count. But the pattern is always the same. What happens is he has a scare, he gets checked out. During the scare, he will make a commitment to be healthier. After he is home free, then he wants to commit to that pattern, but old patterns die hard. You guys hear me saying this a lot. Old patterns die hard. We almost have to be not naive to expect it to repeat. And by doing so, we prepare ourselves not to be blindsided by the ego to take over and be in the driver's seat without us knowing, right? Because then it's running the show, it's making the decisions. We go into autopilot, not even being aware of what we're doing. Yes, somewhere in the back of the mind, we recognize this is not healthy for me, but the drive of the ego is overpowering. The drive of the pattern is overpowering. And so it becomes very difficult to break through these patterns, these addictions. And so recognizing the origin of these addictions or patterns is one thing, but then doing the work to be able to navigate as it's happening is another type of skill set. So how the pattern repeats is that he'll start to feel better again, and slowly, day after day, he'll kind of slowly slip back into the old patterns. But what happens is first he'll start to hide that he's doing it. For example, smoking or drinking, he'll start to hide. But how I notice it, and now my daughter notices it because she's 13 years old, and I protected her from this pattern when she was younger, and it was a lot easier. But as she grew up, she's able to witness and feel it herself inside the home. And what we feel is that he is leaving all the time. The feeling is he's always leaving. He's always going out the door. He's always going outside. And so what that creates is an absence, right? It's a disconnect. And so not only is he disconnecting from us, but he's also disconnecting from himself when he's in that place. And so what happened this past week is, and hopefully this helps to paint a picture. It's hard to encapsulate 16 years of a relationship in a few minutes, but this should set us up to understand how this past week's experience came to be. We are on a path of healing. He had quit smoking when we were in Disneyland for our daughter's birthday because it was the perfect opportunity. It was her birthday wish, and he felt ready. And so it happened. But over time, I noticed when we came home, he started to create that distance again. We felt him leaving. I knew what it was. It was related to his family. Whenever there are things going on with his blood family, it triggers his trauma and therefore triggers this pattern, which then he resorts to the smoking and the drinking to escape or to numb the feelings of the pain that it triggers. This has been his pattern. So his pattern is to numb the pain. So we started to notice this happening. One day I questioned it to see where he's at because I want to know and check in and see, is this where you're at or am I mistaken? Because I don't know 100%, But then we caught him in a lie. And so we know that a lie, the first it's the hiding, and then it's a lie. And then it becomes calling out the ego because the ego wants to protect the lie, right? It wants to keep you in pain. It thrives off the pain body. And so I recognize this pattern occurring. He requested some time to move through this again because he was massively triggered by an incident having to do with his family. And so I left it alone, but over the course of 2 weeks, I noticed the pattern repeating again. And so one day I went outside, I saw him at the fire pit with his employee, having drinks, having smokes, and I knew that this isn't what he wanted, but I also knew that this is the pattern. So I went away and I started processing this because what it triggered in me, it could easily be looked on as the wife that is overbearing, right? And I have to check in. Is this my ego needing to control, or is this me recognizing a pattern that I know is not serving him? It's not what his soul wants. What can I do about this? Because this is creating a separation in our marriage. Again, this is not the first time, right? This is the recurring pattern. This is related directly to the very thing that has been at the core and origin of the reasons why we almost didn't make it in our marriage a handful of times. And so I was talking to my friend and healer, Adaisha, who I've mentioned to you guys before, and she's also gone through something like this in her relationship. And she just said, you could just call it out. And she said more than that, but as she started to open up that perspective for me to consider, I could feel myself getting very scared. And I knew that, and you guys hear me say this a lot too, is that fear can be your compass. And I was scared because I was scared of the ego. I was scared of his ego and what that would mean in this battle that we have to go through every time. And it's not pleasant because living with an ego is scary. You become a punching bag. And it's not because it's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to hurt me, but the ego doesn't want to be outed. It doesn't want to be revealed. So I make the decision because I get clarity in the sense that we've come so far in our journey together that I no longer have the capacity to live with this ego anymore and recognize these patterns and live in this pattern anymore. And the biggest part of me that really chose this time to do this is that our daughter's now grown up and she's been a part of this pattern, which I have now labeled the silly little dance with the ego, right? The dance is, okay, you make a decision, you're going to get better, you're going to focus, and it's for his own health, for your own reasoning, because it's what you desire. And then the dance goes, you start to distance, you start to hide, and then it's a lie, and then it comes out, and then you make it my problem that I'm calling you out and that I'm the one that's being hard on you, when really I'm just connecting to your soul's desire and reminding you of that, which is you on your healing path, which is what you choose to do. If at any point you don't want to do this, make that decision. We figure it out, right? But if we tap into the truth and it is what you want, then I know this is the guiding light. This is the focus of our journey together. And everything else comes from this. This is at the core. Our daughter has now been a part of this silly little dance a number of times to the point where I know it's affecting her ability to have the freedom to be free of the trauma that she's inherited from her parents, from her father in this specific scenario. So I make the decision and I'm going to face his ego. And it was absolutely terrifying because I've been through this before and I know I'm up for a fight. But this is a fight I know is the good fight, and we'll see where it lands. And so, as expected, we really got into it to the point where, prepared to yell, prepared to lay it all down, because this is so important that this is our lives. This is our lives. This is literally your life. You're killing yourself, smoking, drinking. It's not what you truly desire. So what are you doing? Right? And 16 years, I've had a lot of patience to hold space for this pattern to recur many, many times again. But we're now at a stage where I do not have that ability to hold space for it anymore, because what it requires of me is to live in the home and ignore the reality of what's actually occurring, and to witness someone slowly killing themselves and saying, I'm okay with that, which I'm not. So this is also me standing in my power, recognizing that because I love him and I love our family and I love our daughter and I love myself too, is that I won't put up with this anymore. The ego is no longer welcome. These patterns are no longer welcome. And so because the ego was in the driver's seat making these decisions, justifying it with trauma, I have trauma, leave me alone, let me do it in my own time, please be patient with me, all these things, which I understand. There was one moment that was the turning point for me, is he turned at me and he said, you're bringing up a level of rage in me that I can't control, so you better leave before I break this window or break this table. And in that moment, of course, I'm tuning into the reality of what you're saying, and I'm aware that you're really angry right now because we are in an argument, we're in a fight. And so I decide in that moment to leave him and give him space. So I leave this home because we have another building on our land that we're staying in. So I left that building and I went to another building, and I went into our room and I just started crying in our bed. And then I realized that I'm scared of the ego, and I am literally here crying because I'm terrified of his ego. And I knew that when I made the decision to call him out and start this conversation this time in this pattern with the intention of breaking the pattern, calling it out, that this is going to be it. This is going to be a big one. And so as terrified as I was crying. I put on my jacket, put on my shoes. I went back to the other house and I stood inside. And I looked at him and I said, I am not scared of your ego. And I kid you not, it felt like a movie from a scene, because he couldn't even look at me. And I had to say, look at your wife. I am standing here begging you to please look at me. Why can't you look at me? And he couldn't look at me because he was so angry, but I knew that it was the ego. And I said, I'm not afraid of your ego. And I'm not afraid of your rage, and I'm not afraid of your pain, and I'm never going to give up on you, and I'm never going to give up on us, because I know this is not what you want. I stayed. I chose to stay, even when your body might be terrified because it doesn't know where it should be, but I knew that this is where I needed to be, is with the presence of his ego, so that I can continue to call it out. So over the course of the next 2 days, there was a lot of, in his experience, what he shared with me that he felt his nervous system on the edge and was doing everything he could to calm it. And I shared with him that what he was feeling was his nervous system touching into the pain, the root of his trauma, because that's what it was bringing up. And so as you guys hear me talk about, is that once we can tap into that trauma and touch it, then we can start to repair it and to heal it. And so it's always terrifying when we're doing this level of work, because it's so real and raw and needed and required. And so although his body was shaking, which is important, I could see him trying to withhold the shaking. And in that moment, what we really need to do is let go, And so this back and forth of what I feel like he was asking me to do was leave him alone. And I said to him, what I feel like I'm doing is I'm listening to that inner child, that little boy in you who's terrified, who has unrepaired trauma, is screaming has a deep level of pain that has yet to be expressed. I'm listening to him, which is why I stay, Meanwhile, your ego is telling me to fuck off and get out of here. And he couldn't say anything otherwise because that is actually what was happening. After that, I did leave him alone because I knew that I had spoken enough and called out the ego enough. And just so you know, none of this is pleasant in any way except for the fact that I know I'm fighting the good fight. And now I need time for him to sit with his own emotional body, sit with his own pain, sit in his own experience away from me. All I was ultimately trying to do was to call him out of the ego so that he could see what his ego was actually doing, the choices that it was making, how it was actually hurting him on an energetic level, an emotional level, and literally on the physical level, slowly killing himself. To the point where, again, we've been in hospitals more times than I can count with scares of whatever the medical condition was. And fortunately, he's been cleared every time so far. But time is going to catch up with you. Time can catch up with you, especially with your physical body. So I left him to sit with that, and I had to leave it in his court to see where he would come back to me from. And so his question has always been how? How do I tap into this? How do I heal? How do I reach this part of me that I can't? And I just told him in that moment, I said, this is it. You're doing it right now. Because when we're in it, it's hard to know that's the how because you're in it. But this is why it's so important to surround yourself with people who are on the path, who know you, trust you, love you, want the best for you, so they can hold you in the safety of what the healing journey looks like and can be. So the next morning, after he's had some time to process on his own to have more clarity, he came to me in the morning with his head in his hands and he apologized. And his words were, I'm so sorry for all the pain that I've brought into our lives, which is true because that's what the ego does. That's what unresolved trauma does. It carries it forward. It leaks into your daily life. It wreaks havoc in your relationships. And in that moment, all I could do was place my hand on his back and on his head. And he cried in my arms. And it was one of the most important moments in our relationship, in our marriage. Because in that moment, I knew that I made the right choice to fight the good fight, to call out the ego, because I knew so clearly what this was, because I've been through it so many times before, that I will never again let myself back down to the ego, because it doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve him. It doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve our daughter. It doesn't serve our family. Because in that moment, if we do that, we're just letting the ego run the show. And we've done that for many years already. So this is an ongoing process, right? We were only scratching the surface. And just acknowledging in this experience of this is what it means to commit myself to loving my husband through the thick and the thin. This is what it means to fight for our love, to fight for a life of peace and harmony and joy. But we have to move through the dark to get there. And so we're moving through this now, and no doubt I'll be sharing more along the way because this is our healing journey together. We have our individual healing journeys, but then we come together because we are intertwined, we are connected, we're soul partners. And ultimately it connects to our daughter. As we heal ourselves, she benefits from the ripple effects of us healing our trauma, our ancestral wounds, our generational wounds, our lineage, and what we carry forth through that. As I mentioned in the intro of this podcast, it is these connections, these conversations, the threads that connect us in all our relations. Andrew is part of a networking group, and that following Tuesday, he had to show up, and every week they present whatever they're working on that week for their business. And he's usually not one to go first. He has had struggled with public speaking in the past, and it's something that he's working on. And there has been many times in his life where he's shared that, it's a level of false confidence. People say, oh, you're so confident. But for himself, he's like, I don't feel confident. But he called me this morning after the networking and said, today for the first time, I was the first one. I wanted to speak first. And I went up there and I said, I want to start today different. And he started by telling his networking group a little bit about what I'm sharing with you today, about what happened, what we went through. And he shared that, my wife had called out my ego, and I'm recognizing how my ego's been at play, and it's been very humbling. And it's really forced me to ask myself the question of why? Why am I here? Why do I show up? Why? What is my why? So he chose to share from a humbling place, because that's where he was coming from after being so raw from this experience on the weekend. And what that did is everyone else who stood up to speak after that also shared their why, and they were connecting deeper to their own truth of why they were showing up. This, to me, was amazing to hear, because this proves exactly how when we work on ourselves, the ripple effect it has on every single relationship we have with anyone that we cross paths with. And this is so important, because that is the question. If we on our journey can invite someone else to question their journey, that in itself is a gift, because it's in the act of questioning that we uncover. And in the act of uncovering is where we discover. And when we discover, we can actually see the truth, we get clarity, we can repair, we can heal. And from there, we make true connections with ourselves and with those that we meet along the way. And so out of this, Andrew shared that was a level of confidence of speaking from his truth that you can't mask, you can't put on. It's not something we build. You guys hear me say this all the time. Real, true confidence is something we uncover. So in the act of calling out the ego, breaking that down, humbling the ego into the rawness of his experience, of his trauma, through that experience, he was able to tap into a real, true level of confidence that he really hasn't tapped into before. And this is just the beginning. And that's why we're here. Because true confidence isn't a performance. It's an act of self-love. Till the next one. Thank you for listening to Authentically You. Join our community where honest conversations flow in real time. By listening today, you are one of a million, on a mission and movement to grow in self-trust, be effortlessly confident on camera and in life. Because confidence isn't a performance, it's a practice of self-love. Be seen, be heard, be authentically you.